Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoria. Now, in a week of extraordinary acquisitions, I have acquired all sorts of really cool things this week, some of which will definitely be making it into videos, which I'll be filming imminently. I'm not going to go through all the cool things I've acquired this week. They are all antique objects. They're not all swords, but I'll go into that in a future video. But as many of you will know, apart from being someone who stands in front of a camera and talks on YouTube and an antique sword collector and dealer now, I am also a fencing instructor. You know, big surprise, anyone watching this channel will know that. And in the world of antique sword collecting, the types of antique swords which get lots of attention are military swords, particularly if they're associated or can be associated with anyone well known, of which I have some swords which are associated with some people who were certainly well known in the 19th century, but that's not what this video is about. A type of antique sword which doesn't get so much attention are practice swords or fencing swords. Now, you can buy 19th century fencing foils, for example. They're incredibly common, lots of them around. Maybe not as many as you would think that might survive. I've shown some in previous videos, in my weights and measures video where I did small swords and foils comparison, for example. And the thing about foils is they often get broken in use, and this is the thing about practice swords. There are some medieval, Renaissance, Federschwerts, practice fencing swords for longsword which survive, but very few. And that's not because they were that rare historically, but of course what happens to a practice sword, it gets used until it breaks, and then it gets thrown away or recycled somehow. The metal gets stripped down and it gets made in something else, or just taken to a blacksmith, and all sorts of things could happen to it, or it just literally gets thrown away and rusts away in a spoil heap. So fencing weapons, practice weapons, don't get treasured and looked after and survive as well as military weapons do. So therefore, even when we get to the 19th century, there are not as many foils surviving as we would expect. But the thing which interests me more than foils so much are Gymnasium Sabres. Now, I have I'm very lucky to have acquired, partly through chance, partly through my own efforts, a small collection of 19th century Gymnasium Sabres. I specialise in British military ones, particularly the 1864 pattern, which is what most corresponds to the type of sabres that I don't have one behind me, but kind of like that one. There we go. The kinds of sabres that were used in conjunction with the manuals of treatises that I mostly teach from. So, so I have a few. I've got about 5 or 6 of the 1864 Gymnasium Sabre and a couple of variants of it, and other models and so on and so forth. Now, I saw a couple of Gymnasium Sabres come up in auction, okay, and so I bid on them and I won them, luckily, and I was very glad to. And they are a matched pair. Okay, now I'm going to show them. They're here. They turned up today and they are in really good condition. Such good condition that I actually started prodding and poking them around, because I thought these look like they're modern made, but they're not. There are 3 giveaways for the fact that these are not modern made, and I'm going to go through those in a second. I'll just hold one because I don't need to be holding 2, and it's a bit awkward on camera. But how do I know that this is not modern made? Well, first of all, I should say straight up, and I'm going to come back to this point, they came with a plaque. Now, it's very clear that these swords were mounted on something. I would imagine something like a wooden plaque or a wooden shield, something like this. And they were probably mounted on it, and this plaque which came with them is very clearly associated. And I'll explain why I know that in a second. And that would have been on the wooden thing, I imagine it was wood, that they were attached to, display stand or whatever. Okay, that, unfortunately, that wooden thing, whatever it was, plaque, has been thrown away, but what survives are the 2 swords and the plaque, which is enough in this case. Now, apart from that plaque is a vital bit of evidence that I'm going to come back to in a minute. But just looking at the swords, so they are in super good condition. They do have some patina, so aging to the surface of the metal, a little bit of rust here and there, but they are in great shape. Incidentally, I know some of you will be wanting to know immediately, how heavy is it? Where does it balance? Luckily, I did do some measurements earlier. So these weigh 800 grams, pretty much spot on or very close to what we use for our Gymnasium Sabres now. We tend to go a little bit heavier than that, more closer to 850, but these are 800 grams and they balance 9.5 to 10 centimeters from the hilt. Okay, and I must say, anybody who knows about antique swords will look at that hilt and go, ah, that's Italian style. It is Italian style. These are Italian style, well, specific to some schools in Italy, not the same for Masiello, had a different design and this kind of stuff, but I believe these are probably maybe Parisi style Italian sabres. Some people might call them dueling sabres. They're not dueling sabres, they're just Gymnasium Sabres, okay? They weigh 800 grams, about the same as an infantry officer's real sword, and they balance in about the same place as a real sword, maybe slightly closer to the hilt. The hilt design is inspired by Italian cavalry swords from 1871, or no, earlier than that, 1860, onwards, but that style of guard with this sort of almost teardrop cutout, which gives you a lot of protection because you've essentially got a knuckle bow and a broad sidebar. And people go, oh, you could get poked, you could get thrust, or you could get cut through a hole. Well, yeah, that's true with any gap in any guard, but if you made that solid, the guard would be very much heavier. So this is a weight-saving device, essentially. And in the back there, we've got the traditional slot for a sword knot, even though you wouldn't use a sword knot with a Gymnasium Sabre. So we've got some patina and aging, so that's the first thing that makes you think, well, yeah, it is an antique. The second thing is the production quality. It's just very good. There are very few people in the modern world making Gymnasium Sabres of this quality, quite frankly. If this was made in the modern world, I would be phoning or emailing that person and saying, can you make me some more? Because man, this feels really nice in the hand, okay? It's got great distal taper. It's very flexible in the last third of the blade, as you can see. It has a spatulate, as we call it, a rounded flat tip. We tend to prefer rolled tips or bar tips or nail tips these days for added safety. Those thin tips can get through certain types of protective stuff, but anyway, they seem to be okay with spatulate tips on old feathers and right the way through to 19th century sabres. But as you can see, it's got a fair amount of flex in it. But it's stiff in the first half of the blade. It's got a checkered thumb placer on the back strap, as it's called. So apart from the aging and the quality, there are two other things which make me pretty damn confident that this is old and of the age that matches the plaque. The next thing is the leather washer. They both have leather washers. This one's in better condition than this one, but the leather is very clearly old. That is not leather that's been done recently. It is clearly aged and it's kind of rotted a bit. And what usually makes leather rot, unfortunately, is oil. So the thing that preserves the steel kind of is often bad for the leather. Unless you use ballistol, I believe, which they didn't have, but they used gun oil, I think, which ballistol is, but they had different gun oils. And the final thing is that this is shagreen or sharkskin, and it is very clearly the real deal, and it's very difficult for numerous reasons to get hold of sharkskin of this quality. It's very, very fine sort of knobbles on it. It feels a bit like sandpaper, actually. It's a bit like wet and dry sandpaper, but it's very difficult to get hold of that today. People can and people do, but it's fairly difficult, and it's not usually lavished on a Gymnasium Sabre or a practice weapon. We'd usually use leather or something like that these days. So, the fact is, these are two Italian-style military Gymnasium Sabres. Now, onto that plaque. Okay, these are lovely things. These handle really lovely, and I might try and get these replicated at some point. For anybody who's wondering, yeah, I am still working on the so-called Eastern Sabre. I might have some news about that really, really soon, actually. Although I know I've been saying that for years now. Right, so just put the sabre down. Now, the plaque that it came with. Ta-da! It came with this little metal plaque, and you'll see that on the back are two points that were originally driven into, I would imagine, a wooden plaque that went behind this. And the swords are very clearly associated with it. The fact that they're Gymnasium Sabres, clearly of around 1890, 1900, I would date them independently, is corroborated by this. Because this says on it, G.L. Courthope, winner of Singlesticks at Eton, 1896. Now that is just so awesome. Without that, if that had been thrown away, those swords would just be two really good condition, really nice Gymnasium Sabres. But this makes all the difference. Why? Well, it tells us a number of things. Let's come back to the name in a minute, G.L. Courthope, but that does tell us an awful lot. Okay, but winner of Singlesticks makes perfect sense. Okay, because what might you give in this case, a schoolboy who's won the single stick tournament? You might give him a pair of Gymnasium Sabres. It makes perfect sense. If you're going to give someone a trophy for a swordsmanship, essentially, tournament, give them some, fencing swords, and with a plaque, in this case. Eton. Well, we all know, I hope we probably all know, the famous school, Eton. It's one of the great old boys' schools. We call them public schools. It actually means a private school, but it means quite an expensive private school. One of the great schools of England. There's, Eton, Harrow, Rugby, Charterhouse. There's a few, but these in the 19th century were the schools that produced the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of officers for the British Army, the Royal Navy, and so on. So it's very, very common when you research someone in the military, for example, to find that they went to Eton or Rugby or one of these schools. In this case, Eton. So we've got G.L. Courthope, winner of Singlesticks at Eton. Pretty good achievement in 1896. And 1896 exactly does match the style of these sabres. This is the type of thing that Alfred Hutton was using. Had a slightly different shaped guard, but his sabres were probably pretty much modelled on Italian models at the time. And so 1896, yeah, absolutely, the date can match those swords. Single stick was obviously still a popular sport, and it was this kind of the safest way of practicing at that time, of practicing sabre fencing, military sabre. So, G.L. Courthope, we slap him into Google, and what do we find? Well, we find out that indeed he was quite a significant individual. And here he is, George Courthope, the first Baron Courthope, and he was essentially from Sussex, which is in the southeast of England, and he was the son of Lieutenant Colonel George John Courthope. So there you go, it makes sense. He's got a military father. He probably had a little bit of an advantage in the single stick stakes there, because I imagine his father made sure that he did plenty of single stick and fencing in his youth. He was educated at Eton, so that corroborates what it says on the little plaque. And he went on to study at Oxford, and then to become a lawyer, essentially, of all things. But in addition to being a lawyer, he did also, he was a member of the Royal Sussex Regiment, which we would now class as the Territorial Army, essentially a volunteer part-time soldier. And in that capacity, he ended up fighting in World War I, where he was wounded, mentioned in dispatches, and awarded the Military Cross, no less. So a valiant individual who served his nation in World War I, and he was created a baronet in the end in the county of Sussex, mostly based in East Sussex as far as I can tell, and he was involved in politics as well. And in 1945 eventually he became Baron Courthope. So yeah, there you go. It all ties together. So I have to say, for me, an absolutely amazing find, because not only do we have one Gymnasium Sabre, we have a pair of Gymnasium Sabres in really good condition, of an interesting design that show a combination of British and Italian influences, which connects to military sabre kind of history of that period. But in addition, we've got a really interesting individual who fought in World War I, won the Military Cross, and was the winner of single sticks at Eton, and whose father was a lieutenant colonel before him. So it's just kind of like, it's all the things. So I'm super happy. Before anyone asks, I'm not going to be selling these anytime soon, but what I may do is I may try and recreate the plaque that this might have gone on and find some way of having the swords on it. It would be so tempting to use these swords for fencing, but I'm not going to do, because they are a great little thing to have. So I hope that's been interesting, and here's another little look of the Sabres. Really lovely, light, beautifully made things. I love the feeling of shark skin. It gives such absolutely brilliant grip in the hand. And there we go. I'm going to go and read more about George Lloyd Courthope now, and his interesting political, legal and military careers. Cheers, folks.